boss fights, designed to... Hang on, why the hell do I get the feeling that we've done this before? I've already made a couple of videos on this channel that rip apart my least favourite boss fights out of all the games I played. However, given how I've received a fair amount of requests to actually do a list like this, I've decided to look at the other end of the spectrum this time around. So, in order to celebrate my 20th birthday, and because I in no way can narrow a list like this down to just 10 entries, hint, I'm an extremely indecisive asshat, I'll be counting down the 20 boss fights I always look forward to facing every time I replay these games, ranking them based on sense of satisfaction, gameplay, atmosphere, and if it's the context of the game it's from, challenge factor. Basically, if you can't tell from my inconsistent rambling, this is a list of my favourite boss fights of all time. Yeah, I suck at making these intros. Oh, and a quick spoiler alert, seeing as how I'll be including final boss battles, even though that's kind of redundant given how old some of these games are. In any case, just sit back, relax, and let the games begin. An emotion-driven boss fight in a satirical and humorous game like Borderlands 2? Sure, why not? And no, it's not Control Core Angel. That's more of an extended enemy gauntlet / hold the line section. It's like Bloodwing, you dicks. It may not be as emotional as the events of Control Core Angel, but what the heck. Mordecai was one of the original volunteers that received a pretty big personality upgrade from the first game, especially through his interactions with his pet Bloodwing, which makes this boss fight all the more tragic. On your first visit to the Hyperion Wildlife Exploitation Preserve, geez that's a mouthful, you meet up with our old friend Morty, who tells you that Hyperion goons kidnapped Bloodwing and he asks you to go save her. So, you battle your way to Bloodwing's enclosure, only to find it empty and be redirected to what appears to be a testing area and a place for Handsome Jack to show off what a magnificent bastard he is by showing you what happened to Bloodwing, and forces you to fight her. And ironically, it's one of the most enjoyable fights in the game. Despite Bloodwing initially starting off with the slag element, she'll constantly switch to different elements as the fight goes on. For the first few seconds of the battle, you have the slag element, then switching to fire immediately after. Once her health has been drained past halfway, she'll change to shock and be restored to around 75% health. Yes, I know I said I hated this trend, but this is one of the very few instances where it's actually done right. After being reduced to around a quarter health, Bloodwing will make her final switch to the corrosive element and heal up to half health. This fight honestly keeps you on your toes for the most part, requiring you to adapt to different elemental attacks, meaning that if you're playing as a character that specialises in a specific element, like Gage with her shock-based Little Big Trouble skill tree, and Krieg's fire-based Hellborn tree, it helps to have other players that cover your weaknesses in your team. Bloodwing's attacks consist of dive-bombing the arena and launching raid attacks from above, and landing into the arena and dishing out close-range attacks with her talon and beak. Due to Bloodwing changing elements constantly throughout the fight, her ranged attacks and melee attacks deal elemental damage that matches her current state. However, the truly tragic part isn't really shown until the end. Once you finally take down Bloodwing, which isn't easy mind you given how much health she has, Mordecai attempts to trank Bloodwing and attempt to cure her, only for Handsome Jack to then detonate Bloodwing's collar. Bastard. I honestly really didn't know what to expect from Killzone 2. I initially thought it'd be your average run-of-the-mill sci-fi FPS, and while I had a lot of enjoyment with it, for the most part, I was right. The one thing that sets Killzone 2 apart from its competitors is its main villain, Colonel Radek. Looking like a cross between an SS officer and a bad Darth Vader cosplay, trust me that's way more intimidating than it actually sounds, he is actually one of the most manipulative villains I've seen. Everything you do seems to play straight into his hands and it feels as though you're constantly on the ropes from the moment he starts fighting back. Long story short, your army gets decimated, a few key allies get killed, and you end up launching a last-ditch attack on the Hellghast in an attempt to kidnap their leader, Skolar Bizarri. You get to his palace only to find Radek standing in your way, and the final fight of Killzone 2 begins. The first phase of the fight pits you against Radek's personal guards, which is basically a gauntlet of every enemy type you face in the game, and the fight moves around the room of the palace, moving from the main center room to the top balconies and back down again, all the while dodging sniper fire, flamethrowers, falling chandeliers, grenades, rocket launchers, and all kinds of automatic weapon fire as you constantly switch between weapons and cover positions as you mow down hundreds upon hundreds of mooks. Once you've slaughtered your way through that onslaught, it's time for you to face Radek himself. Radek is armed with a powerful LMG, a combat knife, and his trusty cloaking device. This may sound simple in concept, but in practice anything but. Radek uses his cloaking device to essentially teleport around the room, allowing him to launch attacks from basically anywhere. While this may sound annoying, Radnik actually has an easy to track pattern to his cloaking, which serves as a sort of way for him to telegraph his attacks. Or you could just set him on fire and track him down that way. Hey, it works for the pyro. The only real problem is when he rushes you with his combat knife, as that attack can come from anywhere and it's a one-hit kill if it connects. Plus you have a very short window to actually hit him to interrupt his charge or to simply get out of the way. To be honest, this might actually be the hardest of the battles on this list. Radnik can soak up damage like a freaking tank, and the onslaught of soldiers beforehand takes a lot of time and bullets to fight through. So much so the trophy you get for speedrunning this fight requires you to, and I kid you not, kill Radnik in 20 minutes or less. I did it in 15 on my first try, just putting it out there. Yeah, all that challenge is actually quite fair. Aside from his cloak, you can do everything Radnik can do, making the fight play out like the duel between two equally matched opponents rather than the usual David versus Goliath type scenario that you typically get in these kinds of games. It's honestly one of the most enjoyable parts of the game if you ask me. So, Twisted Metal has always really been a bit wacky, even in games that try to be a bit more serious like Twisted Metal Black. Seriously, Black's final boss is a helicopter gunship that looks like something out of Warhawk. Wait. If you want a true sense of this wackiness, look no further than the 2012 reboot. The bosses in this game consist of a pair of giant armored monster trucks known as the Brothers Grimm, a giant robot called Iron Maiden, and well, this. I honestly don't know what the heck Sweet Tooth's Carnival of Carnage is supposed to be. I guess it's the giant mechanized circus tent, but what the hell. This battle has the most phases out of any battle in the series with a total of 4. Starting under the vehicle, before moving inside the main body, then driving up an obstacle course both in and around the upper levels, finally finishing up with an aerial battle about the mechanical monstrosity. Like every boss in the Twisted Metal series, this battle is hard. Not as hard as Darktooth and Iron Maiden, mind you, but still pretty damn hard. The first phase of the battle pits you against a mechanical clown and attached to the underside of the vehicle while dodging the attacks of the various Sweet Tooth trucks driving around with you. The head's only attack is to breathe fire at you, which deals a lot of damage if you get caught in it. However, that's not the only thing you need to worry about. The attacks of the sweet minions can be hard to avoid as your attention will most likely be on other things, but it's not that big of an issue really. The main thing you have to deal with are the mines that can be dropped from the vehicle above, so the best thing you can do in this phase is simply keep moving. Once you destroy the head, you move up onto the next phase. This part of the battle puts you on a pinball table and tasks you with hitting a target to spawn a bomb-carrying clown in the arena. You then need to pick up the clown by driving into him and then launch him off a ramp to use him to destroy a series of targets, all while dodging clowns with chainsaws. This is the only phase of the battle I really don't like. The pinball table layout makes it really easy to take a crop from the damage, and it can be really finicky to pick up the bomb carrier and destroy the targets. But the next phase is more than make up for it. The next phase is really nothing too special. All you have to do is make it through an obstacle course, dodging spiked balls, fans, swords, and all kinds of traps. Like I said, it can be a bit basic, but it's a fun and fair challenge. The final phase has you control helicopters you attempt to destroy the control unit of the vehicle. You do this by destroying the various Sweet Tooth minions, now in robot form. Yeah, they can transform, forgot to mention that. And picking up the disabled forms and dropping them into a hole at the top of the control unit. Don't think that the head itself is completely helpless, mind you, as it has its own attacks such as lunging at you and launching explosives, and it's constantly moving around, making it a little tricky to hit at times. That's what I honestly love about this fight. The challenge. Every single one of your skills is tested throughout this fight, and you're constantly on your toes trying to avoid taking too much damage. The first phase tests your aiming skills, the second tests your basic driving and arena battle skills, the third your racing, and the final phase tests your aerial battle skills. It ends up creating a pretty intense and satisfying conclusion. Lollipop Chainsaw. Possibly one of the most criminally underrated games I've ever seen. Aside from a few Let's Plays and reviews, including a pretty good one by Angry Joe, not many people have actually talked about this game to some extent. Well, there's also a slightly insane commentator that I know who uses the protagonist as an avatar, but that's beside the point. To be honest, I didn't really know what I'd be getting myself into when I first booted the game up, but when the protagonist is this, her boyfriend is this, and the first boss is, well, this, I knew that I'd be having a rather unique experience. By the time I got to the 5th boss of the game, I thought I had seen the best the game had to offer, believing that nothing could top the surreal insanity that was the previous level and boss fight. Boy was I wrong. Enter Lewis Legend. So, motorcycle riding, rock and roll greaser zombie. Not exactly the weirdest thing Suda51's Twisted Mind has come up with, but what the hell. I actually talked about this guy on Halloween list a couple of years back, but I didn't think I did a good enough job of explaining him on that list, and I placed him way too high. So, time for round 2, I guess. This fight is potentially the longest fight in the game, with a total of 4 phases compared to the typical 3. Probably to make up for the lack of screen time that Lewis had during the prior level, and with each phase getting more insane than the last. The first phase begins him riding around the arena on his motorcycle, while his zombie minions attack you to serve as a distraction. Lewis himself attacks by either charging across the arena with his motorcycle, or by blasting at you from long range with the machine gun guitar. Deplete his health in this phase, and Lewis will charge at you and force you into a blade clash which you need to win in order to progress. Not bad, but that phase is only really the tip of the iceberg. In the next phase, Lewis powers his motorcycle, turning it into an elephant mecha. It's Suda51, just roll with it. In this phase, Lewis's mech attacks with a minigun, using a saw blade to slash at you or stun you with electricity, or by stomping its feet on the ground. The mech has a fair amount of health, yet you can easily cut down a large amount of that health by countering its attacks and stunning it. Reduce his health to 0 and win another blade clash, and move on to the next phase. This phase is more of a fusion of the previous 2, as the mech loses its legs and replaces them with wheels, making his attacks pretty much the same as what we've seen before. Sadly, this phase is really my least favourite. It's not really that memorable, at least to me, and it all ends rather quickly. It also doesn't really have anything that separates it from the others, so it's not exactly the most enjoyable. Win yet another blade clash, and you move on to the final phase. In this, Lewis sheds the remaining arm of his mech, turning it into what appears to be a mobile stage. And here's where the insanity begins. Lewis goes all out from the start, constantly charging around the arena, firing off bullets and missiles, and spinning around in place for a powerful close-range attack. I have to say that this is my favourite phase out of the whole battle, most likely because of all the stuff that's going on. You can't really stay still, forcing you to keep moving in order to both attack Lewis and avoid taking damage. Finally, after one more blade clash, Lewis and the battle is over. Pretty incredible how the one boss with the least screen time ends up being the most memorable. It's no secret that Bayonetta's boss fights are, for a lack of a better term, absolutely fucking insane. Most of these boss fights are just as much as a spectacle and feast for the eyes as they are a challenge to overcome, so naturally picking my favourite boss fight from these games was no easy feat. I was going to go with Jubileus for this slot, but I happened to play through Bayonetta 2 again, and I find myself living that first fight with the Mass Lumen more and more. The fight starts out pretty basic. Well, basic for Bayonetta standards, seeing as all the Mass Lumen does in this part of the fight is to attack with that oversized spear of his, and perform his own versions of your Wicked Reap attacks. But once you take up a good portion of his health, the kid gloves come off, and he ends up... well, that escalated quickly. Both Bayonetta and the Mass Lumen summon giant aliens and demons to duke it out in the background, while the two of them continue their fight in the foreground. Admittedly, the visuals are possibly the main reason I love this battle so much, seeing as the Mass Lumen's attack pattern is pretty easy to nail down and most of the attacks are easy enough to avoid with a healthy dose of witch time. But, like I mentioned earlier, the visual spectacle going on in the background more than makes up for it. In fact, this battle in the background even changes the environment you fight the Mass Lumen in, with the giant monstrosities forcing the battle into narrow platforms, hopping between falling platforms, even though this bit is only a mid-battle cutscene, and finally into the air, while a giant Madama Butterfly and Temperatina have a boxing match just mere feet from you and the Mass Lumen. However, all the flashy visuals don't really amount to much apart from a visual treat, as most of the in-battle cutscenes and transitions aren't interactive, so you don't really get the satisfaction of unleashing powerful attacks them all that much. Well, until the climax. Bayonetta powers up Madama Butterfly, and then you then proceed to use Madama Butterfly to punch the crap out of Tempratina's stony face. I really haven't had an adrenaline rush like that since Mad World. Needless to say, this really got me pumped for the other battles in the game, and when this guy showed up for another round a few chapters later, you can bet I was psyched up for it. As much as I love the Batman Arkham games to death, I will admit that the boss fights are not the series' strong points. Across all 4 of the games, there's only really 3 of them that are at least passable, those being Deathstroke from Arkham Origins, Ra's al Ghul from Arkham City, and Poison Ivy from Arkham Asylum. The rest are either massive letdowns like Titan Joker and Killer Croc, play out more like levels like Scarecrow and Riddler, meaning that I can't really consider them boss fights, or end up being so okay they're average. However, there is one exception to this, and that is Mr. Freeze. Admittedly, being the best boss fight in the Arkham games is not exactly a difficult task, so I didn't really know exactly what to expect when going through this fight. But what I got was a boss fight that nails what it means to be Batman down to a T. How so? Well, Batman's greatest attribute is not his physical strength. It's his ability to outthink and to outsmart his villains, to the point that most fights he has with them play out as more of a battle of wits than they do a battle of fists. Mr. Freeze is stated to be far too powerful to be taken on in a straight-up fistfight right at the battle start, forcing you to rely on your stealth takedowns in order to deal any real damage to him, meaning that unlike the majority of the bosses in the Arkham series, you're on the defensive, forced to sneak around in the shadows or risk death by scary Freezing Man, which helps to create a very tense atmosphere. However, if you could just spam one type of takedown, this fight wouldn't be all that fun or challenging, so the developers added in the feature that each takedown will only work once. This makes it so in order to beat Mr. Freeze, you have to constantly adapt into your strategy in order to deal with Mr. Freeze constantly upgrading his armor after each hit. This basically forces you to think like Batman does, allowing for a true feeling of immersion that very few games can match. It's just a huge shame that the other bosses in this series can't live up to this one. I tried. I honestly tried not to. Yep, it's time to hear me talk about Fall of Cybertron some more. Hey. Given how Fall of Cybertron only really has one boss fight, well, there's technically 3 if you count Hardshell and Bruticus, but they go down far too quickly to be memorable, and the game treats them more like mini-bosses. So, yeah, it's a final showdown between Optimus and Megatron. This may just be my bias talking here, but this fight has some of the best atmosphere and setting out of any boss battles I've faced. Picture this. It's a duel between 2 giant robots on the ruined deck of a spaceship that's currently falling apart from both an ongoing space battle and the ship you're on being pulled into a wormhole. Admit it, you're interested now, aren't you? Admittedly, this fight is on the list for more how it serves as a satisfying climax and the recently mentioned atmosphere rather than for its gameplay and challenge factor. I mean, just listen to that glorious background music. But I'm getting off topic here. The interesting thing about this fight is that you can choose which of the leaders you play as, and the choice you make affects how the battle plays out, and it even changes the ending of the game. Granted, the only really major thing that changes is who knocks the other on their ass during the ending cutscene, but still it's a nice touch. The battle plays out very similar to the 2 Grimlock levels, being more akin to a hack and slash game instead of a third-person shooter, and it actually helps the battle rather than hindering it. If the fight was just your run-of-the-mill average shootout, I doubt it would have the same atmosphere. Plus it also doubles as a nice shout-out to previous clashes between these characters. And if there's one thing I've learned, is that this game loves referencing previous Transformers shows. While the attacks of the character you didn't choose are quite similar to yours, while they're having the same basic combos, blocks and shield bash moves, but most characters do shake it up a little by adding in their own unique attacks, mostly involving their vehicle forms. Optimus' attacks mainly involve charging you in truck form, while Megatron instead blasts at you in his tank form. Admittedly, these attacks can be fairly easy to avoid, but it's nice to see a bit of variety. There's also blade clashes. Because climactic sword duels have to have blade clashes. What? I'm not complaining. Time to be even more unoriginal. Have some Wheatley. I honestly didn't know what to expect from Portal 2, let alone expect the game to have a boss fight. So naturally I was pleasantly surprised at the quality of this battle. Given how Wheatley has pretty much become etched into the bedrock of gaming history at this point, no doubt thanks to the brilliant voice work provided by Stephen Merchant, so I don't need any real explanation as to the nature of this fight. The fight essentially plays out like the fight against GLaDOS in reverse. Instead of deflecting rockets and not cores of the boss, you're instead bouncing back bombs in order to stun the boss to allow you to place corrupted cores onto it. You basically beat a robotic moron by making him even stupider. What else would you honestly expect from Valve, really? Anyways, while this may sound simple in concept, it's anything but an execution. Hey, Portal 2 is a puzzle game. If the final boss of a puzzle game was as simple as press X to not die, I feel cheated. And a little insulted. This fight uses a fair amount of the new mechanics introduced in Portal 2, and requires some pinpoint portal placement and precision jumping in order to both stun Wheatley and place the cores onto his body. Especially the final core, which involves launching yourself through a portal by boosting your speed courtesy of conveniently placed propulsion gel. The corrupted cores themselves are possibly some of the highlights of this fight, what with their constant ramblings and mildly incorrect facts they spout at you, with my favourite being the Space Core. Take a guess as to why. Once Wheatley is sufficiently corrupted, it turns out he booby-trapped the one thing needed to use in order to beat him. But then the roof collapses, revealing the moon, and you can fire a portal at it. Guess what happens next? I'd make a space pun, but all the good jokes have been used up at this point. Warning, potential massive spoilers for Infamous Second Son. When you put Infamous and memorable boss fights in the same sentence, you normally arrive at Kessler. Normally I'd agree with you, but I recently played the Infamous Second Son, and this spot has to go to the leader of the DUP herself, Brooke Augustine. After what is possibly one of the best final levels ever conceived, what with you storming the DUP headquarters and tearing apart a literal army of concrete soldiers with the help of your conduit allies, and with them providing one hell of a light show in the process. Hell, I'm a sucker for flashy visuals, get used to it. Basically, after fighting through all that, you finally reach Augustine. This is the woman that killed your brother, caused the members of your tribe to suffer agonizing pain by slowly turning their bodies into concrete, and locks up conduits in a hellhole prison solely because they're conduits. And now, after fighting through all that hell, it's finally time to take her down. Admittedly, the battle starts out pretty lackluster. It plays out exactly like the first battle you had with her only a few missions prior, and not much has changed apart from the power you're restricted to. You basically smack Augustine around a bit, before a lengthy bit of dialogue explaining Augustine's backstory, you gaining her concrete powers, and then holy shit, I was not expecting that! Talk about going straight from 0 to fucking Mach 6. Augustine suddenly throws all restraint out the window and unleashes the true extent of her concrete powers, while you are rendered completely powerless. The battle then undergoes a massive role reversal as you are now reduced to desperately avoiding Augustine's incredibly powerful concrete attacks as you frantically attempt to drain enough core relays to make the new concrete power anything other than completely useless. Don't think that once you drain the last core relay the fight will suddenly become much easier, as even once you've gained enough powers you're still forced into a David and Goliath-like scenario as all you do is literally throw rocks at a giant, making it all the more satisfying when you finally take her down and expose the true evil of the DUP. Well, at least in the good ending. Yeah, Evil Delson's kind of a dick. Pokemon always gets its villain showdowns perfect, with the sole exception of Lysander from X and Y, who in all honesty was a bit of a pushover. Even when the villains were at their weakest, like in the original home games, the battles against them were fun and challenging, no doubt due to the powerful mons they packed into their teams. So naturally I ended up loving the final battle against Ed for Pokemon Black and White. What strikes me about the story of the Gen 5 games is just how different it was from what came before. Or after. Yeah, Gen 6's story was kind of a letdown compared to this. Ed himself is a rather interesting character, coming off as more of a well-intentioned extremist or misguided anti-hero rather than a true villain. But because you're the protagonist and he's the quote-unquote bad guy, you have to take him down. Ed shares a distinction among other Pokemon bosses as he is the only trainer in the series to actually catch and use a legendary Pokemon on his team. Bonus bosses like Palmer from Platinum notwithstanding. This would naturally make the battle generally harder than your average boss, if it weren't for you acquiring the other mascot legendaries before this fight. It may kill some of the challenge factor, but the scenario of the equivalent of Pokemon gods duking it out more than makes up for it. Aside from the legendary Pokemon, he also comes packing a Caracosta, Vanillux, Archeops, Zoroark, and Klinklang, two of which have moves that are super effective against both Rhyhorn and Zekrom, and others have moves that can deal super effective damage against at least one of them. His Caracosta has an incredibly annoying sturdy ability and has a stab boost Stone Edge and Aqua Jet. Archeops may have Defeat Assist ability, but it knows Acrobatics. When you combine that with Archeops' 140 attack stat and its lack of a Held item boosts Acrobatics' base power, plus Archeops' high speed stat, That means that it'll be able to deal some significant damage to you before it goes down. Zoroark in general is a pain to deal with thanks to its moves having a large amount of type coverage. Kling Klang is a physical tank with a defense stat of 115, and it's capable of dishing out a fair amount of damage thanks to Hyper Beam, Thunderbolt, and Flash Cannon. Finally, there's Vanillix, who has Hail to take advantage of the Ice Multi ability, Frost Breath, which will always crit, and Flash Cannon and Blizzard to take advantage of its 110 special attack. All of this combined can create a serious headache for you if you're unprepared for it, and his team can easily take down your Legendary if he catches you off guard. Possibly the most climactic villain battle in the Pokemon series. Kinda sad that this dulls the impact of the following Get This battle, really.